Donald Trump has been slowly killing the United States of America, along with stripping it of its title as the world superpower, but you probably already knew that. What I want to talk about today is why that's the case. The structural problems that are causing the United States of America to completely crash out in a blaze of shame, and most importantly, the specific things that Canada has put in place that are preventing someone like Donald Trump from even coming into power over here. Because there's plenty. And specifically, one of the biggest things that has led to a Donald Trump-like figure taking power in the United States of America is something called gerrymandering, which apparently is a big thing right now because it's even now happening in the United States. I haven't heard much about it though. Thank God. It's probably relegated to like the smaller states, not happening to, Florida or New York or Illinois or Texas or California. But obviously, gerrymandering has a long-term impact on the health of your democracy that aren't just in the short term. That is, the more that gerrymandering happens, the more it is likely to happen, obviously. And the more things that happen that are anti-democratic, the more anti-democratic policies will be enacted. But it's actually completely different in Canada. For starters, we don't even call it gerrymandering. We call it penguin-mandering. After channel member shout out right now. Penguin, shut the fuck out him. Shout out him. Thank you. But actually, Canada has a beautifully long tradition of placing an incredibly large importance on having the most stable and representative democracy with its elected representatives, except for the Senate. That is, we don't talk about that one. Back in 1867, when this country was just getting started by, my glorious, beautiful king who has never done anything wrong ever, John A. Macdonald, don't Google that. The formula for how many ridings a province got was like baked into Section 57 of the Canadian Constitution, as opposed to just being enacted through law like the US. I know it's a formality, but I mean, still, obviously we have gerrymandering. Obviously, we had gerrymandering, but even when we did have it, it was never as bad as the United States. Most notably, in 1957, ready for this? From the top ropes, the place no one expected, Manitoba, my home province, which I am going back to very soon, became the first ever province to hand off its redistricting to an independent committee. When the Liberal Progressive Premier, Douglas Lloyd Campbell, as one of the last things he did, created the Independent Redistricting Committee, one of the last things he did, after he created the Independent Redistricting Committee, he immediately lost the next election. What are you gonna do? But I just want to add on, Manitoba has an incredibly cool history of doing really cool trailblazing stuff with democracy and forcing all other provinces to start doing it because it's just so good. Just like with getting rid of first past the post and becoming the first ever province or state in North America to have proportional representation, where as soon as we got rid of it and enacted electoral reform, other provinces followed suit. And then also in regards to getting rid of electoral reform and going back to the first past the post system we had, and then other provinces following suit. That was funny. But as soon as Manitoba enacted its laws, giving an independent redistricting committee the authority to draw boundaries, other provinces followed suit. And by 1964, the federal government was forced to hand off its power to do so to Elections Canada. And since then, there's never been an ounce of partisan gerrymandering on the federal level, and any politician that even dares to start berating the institution of Elections Canada is always punished. So much so that when the leader of the Conservatives lost his own seat in the last election, right after it was redistricted or redrawn, he didn't even think of doing what Trump would have done. He's like, yeah, I lost. He was forced to do that. Calling the election rigged or dare trying to insinuate that Elections Canada tried to make the riding more liberal so that he would lose it was impossible for him to say that. He would have lost his career like that. But there has, however, been some gerrymandering on the provincial level. Most notably in 2006, the most important province to the Canadian economy, PEI, had a very big controversy where just saying the word big at PEI is ridiculous. But they had a very big controversy where the provincial government decided to not use a map that their independent redistricting committee drew, instead having their caucus draw up two maps and then going with the second one. This was clear-cut gerrymandering, but the province didn't stand for it, immediately having opposition parties lambast them. By the 2007 election, of the 20 incumbent members that made up that party, only 7 of them got reelected, and another 7 of them decided not to run for reelection at all. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that Canada has never had gerrymandering, but what I will say is that Canadians give a fuck about democracy, and when politicians do anti-democratic things, democratic things happen to them. The only way that the Canadian people can actually know about this, though, is through the media, which is arguably the most important of my next points. If you have heard literally any conservative at all talk about Canadian politics, you might have heard them mention the glorious CBC. The Canadian Broadcasting Company. The CBC is a crown corporation that was created around the time of the radio becoming an important thing. It specifically works to create fair and honest reporting and journalism and deliver news to undeserved undeserved. It specifically works to create fair and honest reporting and journalism and delivers news to underrepresented communities who without the CBC would not have access to any coverage whatsoever. Now, if you are a diehard conservative, then you hate the CBC, but only because the amount of times that conservative politicians LARP on about how much the CBC is horrible. But with any amount of digging, you realize the CBC, honest to God, is just good at reporting the facts of a situation to any and every Canadian. And no matter what, every Canadian gets access to the high quality and honest reporting of the CBC, like no matter what, even if you don't pay taxes, like I did for the first 2 years I was an adult, with a very small fraction of the Canadian budget and a consistent track record of having very stringent journalistic standards and constant scrutiny because it's funded by the government after all. I'm 20 years old and I still read the CBC. The CBC is goated. Everyone should use the CBC. I touched on this earlier, but it's because the CBC is the country's broadcaster that there is an incredible amount of scrutiny placed onto it. Every single time a journalist makes a little bit of a mistake, it's big fucking news. And there is an incredibly clear delineation of leadership, which means that the government has absolutely no control over what the CBC posts or what the CBC talks about in their articles. They have absolutely no control, and it is because of that Canadians have learned to trust them. I mean, hell, when you listen to politicians complain about the CBC, they also get cranky that the CBC is not letting them get away with enough. This man was in charge of my country's military, and he's and moaning about the CBC. And it's not even like Canada is that incredible at this. Per capita, the average Canadian puts about $33.66 a year to the CBC, which is almost half the national average of roughly $60 per capita that the G7 has. In fact, in the G7, Canada is actually the second lowest, with the only country coming in at dead last being the United States. And I want to clear something up. Obviously, not every Canadian gets their news from the CBC. I am sweating like a motherfucker here. But the best part about the CBC just existing, not even inherently with a profit motive, is just how dominant of a player it is and how it forces the entire landscape to be more accurate. Because the CBC is known for having good reporting, known for being unbiased, and having high standards, it forces other companies to compete on that, when normally they would just compete on profit. So now any corporation who wants to give information to the Canadian public is run better just because CBC is just existing. Now compare that to the United States of America, where the biggest network news station, Fox, was forced to pay almost $1 billion to Dominion voting machines after it parroted the talking points that the Trump team put out. And in the court depositions, it was revealed that Fox's fact-checking team, The Brain Room, declared that the election rigging claims against Dominion were actually false, and they put the story out anyways. Other things that were revealed are things like the CEO said things like what Trump was saying was pretty much a crime, yet also said that trying to fact-check the claims was bad for business. The host, Brett Baer, said to the president of Fox, "How is that okay? None of that is true as far as we can tell." Tucker Carlson was revealed to have said about Trump, "I hate him passionately." On his presidency, he said, "We're all pretending we've got a lot to show for it because admitting what a disaster it's been is too tough to digest, but come on, there really isn't any upside to Trump." Right before January 6th, he said, "We are very, very close to being able to ignore Trump most nights. I truly can't wait." Then after January 6th, he said, "Trump has 2 weeks left. Once he's out, he becomes incalculably less powerful, even in the minds of his supporters. He's a demonic force, a destroyer, but he's not going to destroy us. I've been thinking about this every day for 4 years." Jesus Christ. Talking about Dominion, he said that the software shit is absurd, but then publicly, later that night, when speaking to his audience, he gave claims about Dominion software at least a little credibility by saying, "We don't know about the software that many say was rigged. We don't know. We ought to find out." He called Sidney Powell a multiple times, also saying about her, "Sidney Powell is lying, that bitch." Also, he said that she is an unguided missile, dangerous as hell, and a crazy person. On November 20th, he said to Brett Baer that Sidney Powell was a cunt, reiterating it in regards to a comment that came after an appearance Powell made on Maria Bartimaro's. How do I actually say that? I've never said that out loud. Where Powell dismissed Carlson as rude for demanding that she back up her fantastical election fraud claims with evidence. How fucking rude of him. Say whatever the you want about the CBC, Canada's largest news network, but they haven't had to pay almost $1 billion because they knowingly lied to their audience about something like the United States' biggest news network did, Fox. But it's not just Dominion, but because of that case, we know now that Tucker Carlson, deep down, hates Donald Trump and is actually a complete grifter. And if you really want to compare news organizations and think about which one works harder or which one is able to do their job better, just think about how much more productive and efficient my country's news network people are, because they're actually able to sleep at night. The last reason that Canada, I believe, isn't as bad as the United States is just because Canada isn't as bad as the United States, specifically on the economy. Now, some of you are going to laugh at me on that subject of me saying I think that the Canadian economy is better than the American economy. And although I think that it's not really as silly a sentence anymore, I do genuinely believe the Canadian economy is in a healthier spot right now than the American one. The Canadian economy is better for everyone involved. This is going to be a moment where I give like, a whole thesis for my channel and my overall philosophy for politics. All right, then. AKA Hudson, try not to mention World War II challenge. Infinite. I think that most problems we are seeing right now are because of wealth and income inequality. I think that throughout history, the worst times imaginable have been catalysts for incredible advancements in the human experience for the working class. Most notably, the Black Plague basically being the nail in the coffin for feudalism. But without that reset of how the system works, it tends to ingrain itself into the culture like a virus. The Great Depression was a horrible time to be an American, but it came off the backs of the Gilded Age, a time of incredible wealth creation and wealth inequality. What ended up changing that inequality was Democrat FDR with his New Deal policies. Pro-worker policies that created a vision of what America could be at its best. What some may call social democracy. Not socialism in any sense of the word, but a beautiful mix of capitalism and anti-market policies like higher taxes, elimination of corruption, strong labor unions, trust busting, and a more active check on monopolies. Now, it was because of those policies that worked to eliminate or cut down wealth inequality that we saw such an amazing economy that we did post-World War II. Specifically because wealth inequality is a drag on economic growth. I have said this multiple times. Any paper you can find on this finds a distinct correlation with a lower wealth inequality and higher GDP growth. But what really turned America into the powerhouse afterwards was the aftermath of World War II. Because every other country had a ton of debt and had to do something about it. There was no room to mess around and lower taxes and cut spending. Because this is where I disagree with socialists. Capital flight does exist. If I raise taxes on rich people, that will make less investments profitable, and therefore that will lead to lower investment. Or that capital will go to other countries who have lower taxes. So that post-World War II time frame was perfect for this, because we raised taxes on the rich, and every other country raised taxes post-World War II, meaning that businesses didn't really have that many places to go if they didn't want to pay high taxes. Obviously, they found ways to not pay taxes, but it just wasn't as profitable to try and get around. That type of global cooperation is hard to force, and eventually, countries started realizing that if they lowered their taxes, then companies would come set up shore there, and not understanding that this triggers a race to the bottom. The post-World War II boom lasted for roughly 40 years. 40 years of economic and cultural dominance that created the greatest time to be an American ever. 40 years of being able to be proud of what was possible when a country set its mind to things. However, as countries learned the trick of lowering taxes to boost investment, and thus juice GDP, other countries started doing the same. Now, I say juice GDP because it is significantly better in the short term, but absolutely detrimental in the long term to lower taxes. Coming off the backs of the 1980s and 1990s, where we did cut taxes, we saw an incredible amount of growth, but it is because of the 80s and 90s that we are where we are today. We are where we are today. I think I said that right. Where, wouldn't you know, wealth inequality is incredibly high. We can't really lower taxes anymore to juice the economy. We're on the brink of a recession just a few short years after the previous one. And the wealthy have taken so much of the money, which is inherently bad. Modern economics is built on the principles of Adam Smith, and that the only real economic value is trade. Trading can be taking money and buying things at the grocery store, and trading can also be taking money and buying in the grocery store. You just want money to be moving from one person to the other, and goods and services at the same time. That's what a good economy is, roughly. So when people have money that's not actively being invested into anything, then that money is effectively a dead weight on the economy. It's not helpful. It's not useful. I'm not here to say that billionaires shouldn't exist. It got sunny out real quick. Great. I'm not here to say that billionaires shouldn't exist, but what I will say is no matter what you think of anything, the economy would be better off if Elon Musk took the money from his shares of Tesla and started spending all of that. The economy would be better. Okay, it's ridiculous, and I'm not trying to say that he should do that or he should be forced to do that. I'm just trying to emphasize a point and make it as understandable as possible by exaggerating. Wealth inequality is bad. It is even on principle a drag on economic growth, as I have pointed out, but I can also link study after study that points this out. Wealth inequality is a drag on economic growth. And when you have wealth inequality, and when people feel like they're being lied to, and that their lives aren't materially growing, and they're not materially getting better than that of their parents, they start to get angry. More so than the internet, more so than the woke mind virus, more so than trans people. The thing that is causing young men to go out and shoot people with microphones and tiny faces is wealth inequality. I'm sorry, but do you think that someone who owns a house is going to be so much of a loser that they would go and expose the inside of someone's neck? No, he'd probably just go mow the lawn. And so to finish my stump speech, my own political philosophy is that of pragmatism. Obviously. And so if the economy changes drastically, so would my own philosophy. It's fluid, okay? I've never understood people who have like a consistent, long-lasting economic philosophy. That's dense. But my philosophy is that there is a huge and drastic case of wealth inequality in the Western world right now. But that socialism and communism are at best not ready to meet the moment right now, and at worst, just plain f***ing ignorant. My own economic philosophy is that we should be trying our hardest right now to create the global cooperation that kind of existed right after World War II, where every country raised taxes on the rich and billionaires, primarily through global minimum corporate tax rates. And that we don't need to do crazy, stupid things like get rid of capitalism completely and abolish the state or implement wealth taxes and ban billionaires. Why don't we just raise taxes again? Why don't we just go back to punching monopolies again? Wouldn't it be easier to start doing things that we've already done before? Or in some cases, instead of having a violent Marxist revolution, why don't we just enforce the laws that we already have on the books to try and stop this? Anyway, with all that out of the way, although I do think that the Canadian economy is kind of now, I don't think it's nearly as bad as the American one. But what it's undisputedly better at is having less wealth inequality. Our Gini coefficient is a decent chunk lower, so yes, the economy isn't the best, but at least we all have to suffer together. Yeah, sure, no one can afford a home right now, but at least no one can afford a home right now. Our economy isn't perfect, but whatever the bad things are, at least we'll feel them more evenly. And I think it's because of that exact fact that you should go and become a member. Oh.
I'm finally done editing the video. I don't think you should become a member. It took me way too long to make this video. I honestly feel bad if any of you paid me money for making this video. Please, thank you for supporting me.
And I think it's because of all those reasons that Canada isn't as polarized as the United States of America, and why Canada is, in my opinion, a better run democracy. Anyway, I really appreciate all my members, who you can see on screen right now, and these people are objectively cooler than you because of it. But the best way to support me is, and always will be, to join the Discord. Please join the Discord. I feel like I'm gonna have a fucking heart attack. I feel horrible right now. I've got a massive headache.